Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. It is Sergeant's Talk TV. This is Big Mike.
And I'm Jason.
Yeah, that's my battle buddy there, guys. Hey, tonight we got a good one for you. And I'm not just saying that because, well, I'm just saying that. But anyway, hey, we're going to talk about a subject that is near and dear to, I'm going to tell you, a lot of Army veterans. And it was the changing of base names. In fact, when they did it, it started off with 10 bases they had on the list, and one of the bases was in Louisiana, or there was two, Camp Beauregard. That is a National Guard and Reserve training base. And for some reason, that's the only one, because there was a General Beauregard in the Confederacy, and for some reason they didn't change that name, and I have no idea why. But that one made it through. Maybe Louisiana was pushing it. I have no idea. I couldn't find no information on why they didn't do that. But hey, guys, we're glad you're here. Jason, you just got back, didn't you?
I did. We've been hot and heavy on the road. We're practicing. We're practicing for the summer schedule of never being home. Yes, yeah. Everything's still getting done at home.
Hey,
if anybody knows how to make that work, email me. I need to know.
Yeah, and like I promised, you got your shirt.
I did. And guys, Mike held his promise, and he was accurate. I got it on Friday.
Yep.
But I was already gone. Yeah. So it sat in the house for a week. And
I've got a surprise for you at the meetup.
Really?
Yeah, got another surprise for you. I got to take care of my battle buddy.
All of you in here know, right? Like, I've served with a lot of soldiers that have been in the Army and that kind of stuff. And the Marine Corps, we're loud, we're proud, we're glad, right? We depend on everybody else, though.
Yeah.
Right. The Marine Corps is so small. We need the Navy to provide us medical care and float us around and go everywhere, and the Air Force to fly us because we can't fly ourselves, evidently. And then the Army is just like, hey, don't worry, guys, we got you. We'll be big brother. And Mike's doing it. Mike's big brother, and he's just got me covered, and it feels like home. I appreciate it very, very much.
Not a problem, brother. So let's see who we got in the chat real quick. We had a whole bunch of people. We had 26 likes before we went on the air, and we had a whole bunch of comments and stuff like that. I mean, there must have been 28, 29 comments, but now that we've started, most of those has gone away. So we've got, I think that said Arim, Gocek, and Fam. Welcome. They're from Turkey. We got Husky Edna in here. She's down in Australia. We got Pacquiao Mern. She is coming live with us from the Philippines. So hello, my friends.
Awesome. I see this MT Homestead. Has anybody else heard of MT?
I have.
I think that might be our mod mother.
Yeah, that's mod mother. Terry, yeah.
And well, we've got Sir Grace and Glenda at Grace and Fire. Or no. Yeah.
Yep, Grace and Fire. Glenda's in here. And Sir Grace got his Sergeant's Talk TV. They ordered one off the website. So thank you. We got David Moffat's in here.
Hello, Brother David. And there's
another moderator, Lila Newton. Yeah.
Who am I seeing? Webb's Webb has made it in.
There you go.
I think if I'm correct, the tracker of all meetups. He has the link on there. If you want to know where there's a meetup in an area, he's got a spreadsheet on his page that you can know when there's meetups.
Hey, and guess what? There's a new meetup happening this year right down the road from us in McAllister. And we'll talk about that. I think we got some kind of information written down somewhere about that new meetup. What is it? It's a rendezvous.
It's a homesteading expo.
Yeah, homesteading. I think he called it a rendezvous or something like that. So we'll be talking about that later.
We might have to look into that one, but that rendezvous sounds fancy, and yet I don't know.
No, you can still drink.
Okay, I'm in.
There is Debbie Drox in here. Hello, Debbie.
Hello, Debbie. I see Lumpy Burks made it in.
Yep. There's our buddy Reverend Dream, our brother.
Still moved, and I'm still talking to everybody I can to go back and watch.
Exactly.
Like, that's amazing.
And we had some really good comments from his testimony he gave. Yep. There's Judy Herman's in here.
And the Lone Cross has made it in.
Hello.
PJ's.
Yep, PJ's in here. Hey, there's Tim Mason.
Tim, good to see you in here. Hopefully you're doing better.
Yeah.
At least he's gooder enough to be on here tonight. That's awesome.
That's right. Let's see.
There's Bobby at Pettit Jean River Homestead.
There he is. There's my favorite female Marine, Dawn at Hat Creek.
I was out by where Dawn used to be, but not quite. I don't know. I wasn't too far from where Dawn is. I was on her side of town.
Oh, okay. There's Tiffany over at Canadian Family Life. She's in here.
And there's Deb. Says hello to everyone. Hello, Deb. Rainy Ridge. Rebecca
Touched by Yarns in here. Hey, there's James Hall. Lynn the Okies in here.
Wandering Gypsy Vanner.
All right. Hey, Pappy Smurf. How you doing, Pappy Smurf?
D. Stanley. Welcome in, D.
Wandering Gypsy Vanner. Her name is Catherine.
Wow. Welcome, Catherine.
Hello, Catherine. Oh, I see her picture there. She's a veteran.
I was just about to say, how do you guarantee a veteran? They got a picture of being in uniform.
There you go. Yep. Butler Family Farms here. How you doing, Jerry and Susan?
I don't think I've made it to the bottom yet. Yeah. Oh, now I see them. Okay.
All right.
Yeah, I just got home from Tennessee on Sunday, but then I literally just got home because I was out helping people. So trying to.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I was going because you guys were saying on one of your videos or live that you were staying longer. And I said, wow, they're going to be rushing to get home.
Well, and there was a chance that we would have ended up having to stay in Tennessee, but luckily her dad was doing good enough that we could leave because it was going to be a Friday to Friday. But then that turned into, well, we need to stay till at least Sunday. And if things didn't go well over the weekend, are we going to leave from Tennessee and go straight to Oklahoma?
Right.
Do not pass go, do not collect $200. And but it went well enough that we were able to come home and get some things squared away and get ready for the meetup and kind of regroup and get ready for it. So,
right.
Yeah, but always on the go. Honestly, covering it quick. I know it's not about the subject tonight, but, I definitely discovered I've got to stay. And I think it's something, because I see it with a lot of our veterans.
Yeah.
We naturally need to stay active.
Yeah.
And we went to Tennessee and her dad, obviously wasn't in the greatest health, but he's normally pretty active, but he's slowed down. And I'm like, great, let me do some projects. Let me help you. Let me get this. And he's like, no, I just want to hang out and visit. And I'm sitting there like, there's got to be something. Like, what am I going to do? Like, I'm going to go pick up sticks in the yard. And it just, sitting still doesn't work well. And it was nice to relax. And I'm glad that he had us do it. But at the same time, I'm like, I've got to go. At least while I can still go.
Yeah. Hey, there's Karen Bress. She's in here.
Hello, Karen. Oh, there's Rachel back to good. She snuck in.
Hey, there's Mama Carolyn. Hey, and so she left a comment, and her dad was stationed up in Alaska, and the only air base in Alaska is is it Elmendorf? Is up in Alaska. And back then her dad was stationed there between in 56 to 60, somewhere in that area. So he had to be with the I think it was called the 10th Fighter Command or something like that, but they were called the 10th. And that's been the only air base that's been up there. They had a few other ones that were like test bases and stuff like that. But so yeah, her dad served for a long time. And so I looked that up for her. I think I commented on her comment wherever she left that on one of the channels. So yeah. Hey, there's Back to Good. They're in here.
Yep. Said she was doing dishes and couldn't type right away.
There you go. Yep, meetup's coming. Meetup's coming.
A couple days away. Oh, here's 20 years ago from my retirement. Yeah.
Wow. My last picture in uniform. Yeah. I just on April 1st, I've been retired from the Army for 24 years. Yeah, that's a long time.
I feel like a kid. Oh, it's well, and we were talking the other day, so okay, we all know Marine. I'm not good at mathing. I retired in 2015, so that makes 8 years now.
Oh, yeah, Elmendorf, yeah.
Yeah. And I was talking to one of my old Marine buddies the other day and was like, yeah, I retired and it was like just a couple years ago. And then I'm doing them. And I'm like, that was 8 years ago. I don't know where that time has gone, but it's crazy to think it's been that long.
Judah Herman says, I have a correction to make. I had said I have 9 veterans in my family. However, I forgot about second stepdad or two stepdads. So that makes, wow, that's a lot of veterans, counting my dad. Mom married 3 veterans. Okay. Hey, veterans are some good guys. A little opinionated, but
no, never.
Sometimes hard to live with.
At least Mom had good taste, so
yeah. That's right. Oh, there she goes. It was 57 to 63 that he was there. Okay. Man, that's cold. Whew.
Yeah, but I had a cousin, one of my younger cousins, that he was a little late to the game of joining the Army, but he did it and joined. And man, they tossed him around like crazy. Just you talk about miscommunication within the military, and he was the epitome of it. They sent him to a duty station, went there, and they're like, "We don't even have your MOS here. Like, we don't even rate you here. Like, why are you?" And it was in Germany, so it's like it's not like, hey, they just sent him stateside. They sent him to Germany, And Germany's like, we don't even rate like we don't have your job here. Like, and next thing you know, he ends up in Alaska. And his wife, who was born and raised in Southern California, was like, no thanks. But they moved up there. They did 2-3 years in Alaska, and they didn't want to leave. She loved it. He loved it. He's like, this is great. Yeah, the cold, but he's like, you get used to it. And they loved being up there. And I'm like, okay, maybe. I mean, it was kind of cool that he had moose in his front yard, but that whole snow factor had me out.
There she is, the Queen of Tin Killer.
JB.
Tin Killer, pure Okie, JB.
Oh, I'm gonna have to remind. Maybe I'm just gonna have to make Tara bring her crown, and JB can wear it around.
There you go.
So.
All right. So.
Yeah, I think we're. Oh, there's Radio Jonesy.
Radio Jonesy.
And Jonesy, somewhere around here. I know it's. Oh, I think it's right up here. We got your package, brother. Thank you so much. Got a little gift back from Jonesy today, and pretty excited about it.
There you go. And Jonesy's going with us on the cruise to Alaska.
Yeah, I picked up on that. We want to do it, but I just.
Well, I like the fact that right now we booked everything and we're paying monthly to the cruise line, so it's not whatever it is all at one time. So that's a good thing about them. We get to keep our rate. So
right. Yeah, we looked into it pretty hot and heavy, but it's just we have too much going on.
Right.
And I know it's ahead. It's 2025. Next year it's going to go, but we don't even have half the things we thought we'd have done now, and just not in the cards. But I know it's going to be a great time because I know pretty much everyone that's going, and wanted to be an MP was too short.
Yeah, back in the day, they used to have a height weight requirement to be an MP. It was separate for women and for men. There was two different height weight standards.
Well, and I never.
I mean, when I first came in, I had a staff sergeant that was probably 315, 20 pounds. That was back in 1979. He was a big old balloon. Okay. And every year when they did their PT test, I was listening, and his platoon sergeant came up. He goes, "Hey, if you were fit, how fast do you think you could run the 2 mile?" And he couldn't. Serious. He couldn't do push-up because his fully extended. His stomach was still on the ground.
Wow.
It was crazy back then. And then they changed all that, and people had to retire. So yeah.
I didn't know anything about a height standard until I was talking to some of the tank crewmen, and there actually is, because they have to be able to fit inside the turret of the tank.
Exactly.
There's a height requirement, and one of the guys that I became close friends with actually was at that like max height, and he was like 6'3", 6'4", and I'm 6 foot, and I didn't fit in there very comfortable. And I'm like, how are you fitting in there? Like, I don't understand. How is this working?
Right. All right. So, hey, let's get this thing started.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm going to get my cheat sheet up, and I've got that on the other computer. So if I'm looking that way, it's opposite. If I'm looking that way, I'm getting my notes that we got on here. So one of the reasons I talked to a lot of veterans, whether it's at the VFW, it's with Combat Vets Motorcycle Association, or just people on base and stuff like that I know. When this came out, people were in an uproar. And mainly it's because it was the veterans and stuff like that. And they didn't understand it. And the reason they didn't do it is they really didn't give a reason, the true reason why they started this program. At first, they said, "Okay, we're going to review all the bases and their names and make sure that they are quote unquote politically correct with today's society." Okay. And with that being said, the military has changed the names of some of the bases, eliminating the honoring of Confederate officers who fought and upheld slavery. Okay. Well, when you say something like that, there's a lot of people out there says there's only one cause for the Civil War, and that was slavery. And that is not true. Okay. The main reason, that is a very important reason to do that, but that was one of the reasons why there was a Civil War. The other part was in the industrial North, they made things. They had steel plants and they had all that stuff that was up there. You know what I mean? But down south, they grew everything. And so the North was forcing them to move food up north to feed the population that's up there in the industrial North. Well, they were doing that, and the South started saying, wait a minute, didn't we fight a Revolutionary War with the premise of taxation without representation? So they were taxing the South, and the tax was to bring food and all that stuff up north while they built buildings and found ore to make, for steel and all this other stuff up there. Well, that's what their gig up there was. And they say, you know what? Why are we feeding these yahoos? And now they're getting on us about owning slaves down there when people up north, they had them. I mean, we had presidents that had them, and now it's a problem. And so, of course, everybody knows that the South tried to succeed from the Union and everything, and nobody really liked that, and skirmishes. So the North said, hey, let's send troops down there and get these boys down there, them good old boys, in order, and, get them dressed, and do what we tell them to do, because we're up here. We control the America. And so that the slavery was part. But when they came out with this, they only centralized it on slavery and discrimination. And one of the things is that they cite in here, they said the efforts to rename military facilities that had their origins in the Confederacy was a result of a discussion about race that followed the death of George Floyd. And that's the government speaking. Okay? That's the government speaking about that. I'm not going to get into the whole George Floyd thing. That's
right.
You can read that on your own. So they said, okay, we're going to do this. And they got a whole bunch of generals. In fact, one of my brigade commanders, who's now a 3-star, was one of the people on that panel. And in fact, renaming all the bases, the chairman of that, and they only renamed Army bases, was a Navy admiral. She was the chairman of the committee. And just to rename Army bases, because they were happy with the Marine bases. They were happy with the Air Force, the Navy, and all that stuff. They were happy with all those names. It was those dirty treadheads in the Army that we still had bases within the South that was named after. When they named those bases, because they fell into the what we used to call the dirty South, the Confederate area of the United States. They got to give them their key generals' names just to keep the peace. Okay. And so that's how those names got in there. And I didn't really want to get into each and every Southern general and what type of general they were and so on and so forth. All these generals went to West Point. Okay. They all went to West Point. And when the war broke out, of course, you went home. Okay. And that's how everybody got separated. And you could have cousins up north and cousins down south, and they fought against each other and they killed each other and all that stuff. But when they started this program, the Army said, we're going to give, or the DOD said, we're going to give you $1 million to change this. Okay. Well, $1 million wasn't even close. While they were doing this, it rose up to $36 million of taxpayer dollars to do it. When it finally ended and all the bases' names have been changed, it took $60 million to change the name of 9 Army bases. So when you look at that, you got to look at every text, the names have to be removed. Every street, every building, every entrance gate. I mean, it goes on and on and on to your office letterhead. So you take all that boxes and boxes of letterhead or copying paper that they've made letterheads out, all that had to be trashed and recycled and did whatever they did with it. So everything has a cost in it. All the contractors, the Department of Public Works for all the bases, you had to pay, they had to count in the labor, the time, all that kind of stuff, materials, everything they had to do. So, and then they had to put all that stuff in storage. The new names will fall into several categories. When they did it, they said, well, we're pretty, we want to be politically correct, and every base doesn't have to be named after, a military person. Okay. So what they did was the new names, they fell into several categories, including those of people like heroes or key leaders associated with that base, inspiring words like victory, some aspects of local geography, or something that describes the base military role. Okay. So, in doing that, they came up with 9 bases that they said these definitely have to change because it angers a lot of people. It didn't really anger any of the military people, but if you remember a few years back when they started this, we had uproars all through major cities and stuff like that. And people wanted change. They were going into Washington trying to pull down Abraham Lincoln's, and they were marking it up and spray painting stuff and doing all kinds of crazy stuff on the National Mall and all over and stuff like that. To include, they wanted to, what is that, that Confederate scene that's on the side of a mountain in Georgia?
Stone Mountain. It's called Stone Mountain.
Stone Mountain.
Stone Mountain, yeah.
It's
So
really
they really wanted them to take a chisel or a jackhammer and just tear that off the mountain, right? And I don't know how far they got with it. I think it's still up. It's in Georgia. But since we mentioned that, in Georgia, the first base that they changed the name from was Fort Benning, Georgia. That is the airborne school. That is the home of the Rangers. That is Pathfinder School. That's the infantry school. All the those combat arms go to school there.
Yeah.
And
that base. So that one holds a heart to me because I spent my last 3 years in the Marine Corps at Fort Benning. That's where I retired from.
Yeah.
And the Marine Tank School went there. Well, all of the Army Armor, because they had shut down Fort Knox, went to there. But there's multinationals that train there.
Yeah.
It wasn't just U.S. services. You walk around and you didn't know what uniform from what country you were going to see roaming around the PX, the commissary, any of those types of things. So,
Yeah.
it was a multinational base, really.
Yeah.
Just crazy to think that I don't know. I'm gonna try to hold the whole base renaming is not a very. I love that we're talking about it, but it's aggravating of why we had to change them.
Yeah. So Fort Benning, Georgia, turned into Fort Moore after Army Lieutenant General Hal Moore and his wife, Julia Compton Moore. Hal Moore received the Distinguished Service Cross for heroism in Vietnam, and Julia Moore was an advocate for military families. She was a big spokesperson for that, and that is the basic reason why they changed that. I think they also had David Moore. He was a retired colonel, and he was also legacy on Fort Benning. As his dad, they named the base and stuff like that after him too. So he was an officer also at Fort Benning and served overseas. So yeah, it was hard for a lot of people. It was hard for the Rangers because, I mean, they're high speed, low drag on Fort Benning. Okay. And I've been to Fort Benning. I've been to jump school. I peed my pants when they put me up on Ungawa Tower for the first time, because the highest I've ever been was on a roof of a house. Okay. And they took me up there and I actually peed my pants because, I was young, dumb, and I was scared senseless. So yeah. And then I did 5 night jumps, because you got to do 5 jumps to get to graduate out of school. And I say 5 night jumps because when I went out, my eyes were so tight, you couldn't get no sunshine in between my eyelids.
I'll tell you that going out to, and what is the name of the field they do the jumps at? There's a name of that field, that airstrip or whatever. Well, being there for 3 years, we would drive out there, and I can't remember what the name of that is, but
yeah,
where they do all the jumps, and they land, and of course you see the towers on main side, kind of what you're talking about, where they raise you up and then they drop you down for your initial, and it was cool as a spectator to go and watch those things. Like, you could take your family over, and if people visited, and I was this close because I was stationed there. And even though technically as a tank mechanic, right, I don't need jump wings. They're never dropping in. That was not an option, but I could go because I was permanent party staff.
But wasn't it, didn't they have a, in case when you get there, you got to take a PT test. And if people failed out of that, didn't they have standby slots for permanent party people there?
That's typically, sometimes they would. Most of the time, like if you got there to go through the school, like at least for our school, if we had students that couldn't make it through our course, then they actually just got recycled and sent to a completely different MOS.
Oh, okay.
We didn't. I know in years prior, because my brother was actually in that situation when he joined the Army.
Yeah.
Was he went through school, but because of medical, he couldn't graduate and go to the fleet, go to his duty station. And they kept him on for a while as a permanent personnel, like admin type guy. But yeah, I was this close to going to jump school till I went out to that field and I watched how their bodies moved coming out of the airplane.
Yeah.
And I went, no, I'm good. Like, I like my spine being in its current location.
Well, I think that the scariest one was the low altitude jump when they come across there and you're out and your chute opens up and it's like a rock, boom, you hit the ground. It's called low altitude. So I didn't really care for that because I was a skinny 164 pounds, soaking wet, 6'4", looked like a goober and stuff like that. But hey, if I did it nowadays at, almost 300 pounds, yeah, I'd hit that ground so hard, they just have to bury me.
Yeah, it's just like, give me a hole because that's where I need to be. Just go ahead and dig it. I'm going to land in that 6-foot spot. And then when they're done, throw the dirt on because that's where I'm going to be.
Exactly. All right. Hey, you want to take the next one?
Yeah, there's a whole lot of information, guys. Fort Bragg, North Carolina, which I've got history of Fort Bragg. I never went there as a military thing. But Fort Bragg was very close to Camp Lejeune, the Marine Corps base. It was only 2 hours away, and I had family that lived just outside of Fort Bragg. So I spent a lot of time in that Fayetteville, Fort Bragg area. And honestly, it wasn't until here recently I was talking to my uncle that still lives close to it, that they changed it to Fort Liberty. Not sure the whole story of why, but once again, kind of on the whole pretense, right, that Mike talked about earlier was they're named after Confederate generals. People are offended, and we can't offend people anymore. So they're going to change the name.
Yeah. So I think the reason Fort Liberty, when you go to combat schools and you're doing sand tables, the Army really likes to use the word a fictional base called Fort Liberty. We still use it today where I work as a civilian when you're doing like budgets and stuff like that when you go to school, and they always use Fort Liberty. And they named it Fort Liberty because of the mission to liberate other countries through the special forces, through the airborne units and stuff like that. So that's where they came up with Fort Liberty, because that base, the special forces, people may not know this, but there's a lot of places they can't talk about that we send the SF guys to, the Green Berets to, and stuff like that, and the Rangers and all that kind of stuff. So that's why I read something on there that the decision maker was to choose something there that the troops could get behind because they're deployed all the freaking time. And so that's why they chose Fort Liberty for it. So, all right.
And because that was kind of short, I didn't have a lot to go off from. I'll take the next one.
Okay.
In Fort Gordon, Georgia. Another Georgia military base, and in my command while I was at Fort Benning actually fell under, I think our headquarters was technically at Fort Gordon. So we would go there for admin stuff, but not much. But Fort Gordon is now Fort Eisenhower.
Yes.
After President Dwight D. Eisenhower, and he served and was a 5-star Army general and the Supreme Allied Commander of Forces in Europe during World War II.
Yes.
Very well-known name, obviously. Like, you don't even have to be in the military or serve to know who President Eisenhower was.
Yes.
So, justified, nobody should be offended as to, naming him. And I've actually read a few books, like, they tell you what they want to tell you in school, but then when you can start looking at things afterwards and realize, especially during World War II, a lot of the things that went on, and you start kind of being able to piece some of what these generals in the military had to deal with during those times. When we look at it and try to equivalate it to today's time.
Sorry.
You're being noisy.
I know. Sorry.
To think about it in today's terms, what these guys had to do back then with, limited assets and not all the tactical training and knowledge that we have because they already did it. They were
Right.
doing it for the first time.
Yeah.
Just, phenomenal.
And I don't have a problem with Eisenhower. He had a great career. He commanded probably the largest invasion force ever created. The responsibilities on his shoulder, I wouldn't want at all.
Right.
And he was a good president. I think he's the one that started the Highway Act to build the
interstates. Yep.
the interstates and stuff like that. So he has a great legacy, both as a military man and as a politician also. So,
and I think if I remember it correctly, with the whole interstate program, was a big part of it was to get like veterans or guys coming back. They were getting them back to work because they had served. They went to World War II. They fought in all these different campaigns and then came back and they're just standing there like, I don't know what to do with my hands.
And could you imagine back then when he was president and they started that, they could probably, for $1 million, they could probably get 100 miles of highway done. Now you can't get between the two off ramps. $1 million would get you to two off ramps.
And they were probably built better back then.
Sure.
Like today, they build the roads and they maintain them for job security. They know they're going right back to that one because
they were built by combat engineers and stuff.
Right.
They dig deep.
So, really, really cool history looking back into that. And not really a major issue with that change necessarily because of who he was and some of the very positive things that he did.
Right.
But then again, kind of like you said, was taxpayer dollars changing all of these. And it's not just like, hey, we'll change the name, everything's good.
Yeah.
All the documents, all the street signs, all those types of things associated with it. So,
yep, that's absolutely correct. I mean, it's just mind-boggling, all the things that they had to change. So the next one is Fort A.P. Hill, Virginia. Fort A.P. Hill, Virginia, changed the name to Fort Walker. After Dr. Mary Edwards Walker, the first female surgeon in the Civil War and the only one woman to be awarded the Medal of Honor. Okay. So, yeah, you did not, I don't know that you could ever watch anything like any historical movie or anything like that where they put a female doctor. They were usually nurses or local townswomen that served because back in the days, if you were a spouse and you lived out wherever, you had to learn something to fix your husband, to fix your kids. So that usually became like, we have the stigma about back in the day, a nurse's job that's a woman's job. And that was like that for years. It's not like that anymore. I watched some show and this guy goes, "Oh yeah, you were over in Desert Storm." He goes, "Oh yeah. Did you have a cush job?" He goes, "No." He goes, "I pretty much, I was in a trauma hospital on the front lines, getting guys patched up to go back. So yeah, it's not really a sissy field, And I think that was on Friends or something like that. And I'm just like, I go, touche, guy. Because I'm telling you something, to be a trauma nurse on the front lines, all you're doing is stopping the bleeding, keeping them alive, and shipping them out. I think, what was that one with Charlie Sheen in it? Was it Hamburger Hill or something where the medic was probably the most knowledgeable person on the frickin' battlefield
Yeah,
in Vietnam.
I know which one you're talking about, and I don't think it was Hamburger Head. That there was, maybe it was. I know what you're talking about. I've seen it, but
So anyway, A.P. Hill was named after her, and the only woman to be awarded the Medal of Honor. So
I think the one and only time. So AP Hill, when I first joined, a lot of the guys that had been in, the old timers had always talked about AP Hill. They had to go out there because that was even being at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. AP Hill, they had to railroad all of the tanks up to AP Hill to do the tank qualification.
Yeah.
Because that was the only place that they could actually fire live tank rounds to be able to do. And then after, I don't know what year it was, but they had finally built a range there in North Carolina so they could do it. But all these guys had stories about AP Hill, and I'm like, man, I'd love to go there. And I got one chance.
Beautiful post.
And it is. Oh man, you can pet the deer there.
Yeah.
There's so many. They're so used to people that and they're in herds. You never see them in one or two. They're like 15 or 20. And I went as a pre-workup for a deployment. We went and we took vehicles up and did some training. And I'm glad I can say I did it, but it was not as I think right now I think it's only a National Guard or Reserve. They don't have any, and that was the first time that we got our experience because these guys come up, they were National Guard, and we're like, hey, we need this, this, and this. They told us to come see you guys, and they came up, big old wad of chewing, National Guard guys. And they're just like, hey, boys, he's a Virginia National Guard. We don't do that around here. And I'm like, what did he just say? What? And so that was our ongoing phrase for the rest of it. It was like, no, we don't do that. We're the Virginia National Guard. And, but it was cool to go there because at that point, it was almost like the barracks they put us in were super old. And so it was like living in a museum for a couple weeks.
Yeah.
But glad I got to do it.
And way back in the day, that used to be also the home of the presidential riding stables out there.
Oh, but it's a beautiful country.
Yeah. One of the presidents, I can't remember who it was, but I guess they family liked to ride or whatever, and they built that out there. And then when you're at Arlington, they have the horses there that pull the caissons, and that's to train them horses. They did it out there, and then brought them into the stables there on Fort Myer, Virginia. I think it's called I can't remember, Fort Myer something. Fort Myer Henderson Hall. That's what they call it now. Mm. So, and my job, all these bases, the job I have is that same job as at all these military bases. And I wouldn't want to be at Myers Henderson Hall because that's where everybody in the Pentagon, that somebody has their events and their kids' weddings, and you have to deal with stars all day long.
All the VIPs and definitely hard. So we're gonna move real south. We're going to Fort Hood, Texas, but it's not Fort Hood anymore. It's Fort
Cavasso.
Yeah, thanks. I would have butchered that one.
Yeah.
After Army General Richard E. Cavazos, who received the Distinguished Service Cross for heroism in the Vietnam War.
Yes. Yeah. So he was the very first Hispanic 4-star in the Army. The very first one. And I guess it's kind of like, South Texas, mid Texas, wherever, Fort Hood's just south of Waco. and stuff like that down there. And I mean, if you read his bio on Cavasso, yeah, he was an Army stud. And the soldiers loved him. And so, yeah, that was the reason why they did that. It kind of fit the Texas area and stuff like that. And I think they used a lot of reasonings why they chose the certain people and stuff like that. And they really went around the horn to actually make sure they covered a lot of boxes.
Yeah.
If you will. And I'll just say
they're not, that's something that we were actually watching a documentary the other night about, like, kind of this, relatively the same subject is they're not making new bases. They're not developing new military installations. They're not developing, we have all these things that represent our history, whether it was, and I think this one was talking a lot of like Mount Rushmore.
yeah.
With the 4 presidents on there, like who else could be on, like another Mount Rushmore.
Yeah.
And, it got us thinking was, why don't they continue? Like back then, when there was limited technologies, there was, limited abilities, they created so many tools to make Mount Rushmore, but then
Yeah.
when we look at, in this situation, military bases and installations where we have modern day heroes from, modern day campaigns, but without having new space available or new reasons to add to something, like nothing, like it all just kind of stays in the history. So, for them to change some of them to kind of maybe update it.
I think one of the rules is you got to be dead.
Yeah, that's,
But I think one of the Navy ships, they were named after somebody that was still alive. I can't remember who it was. Because they got so many ships, frigates and all kinds of stuff. So,
and you mentioned that, and I know this is kind of off subject, but it's somewhat relative, right? My oldest daughter got a full ride scholarship to college. She was the first one for this scholarship fund. She was their first student that they wanted to push through. And when she graduated 4 years later, they had a big dinner right before graduation with the sponsors of that scholarship.
right.
Super cool. Well, they named it, and I can't remember what the name of the scholarship fund is. They named it after, another guy that did a lot of big things in the environmental engineer community and stuff. And they're like, we want to dedicate it to this guy. He's still alive. He was at the dinner.
Oh, wow.
And so we're sitting there having dinner, and he looks at me and he's like, we were talking, him and I got along really well. And he's like, but it's weird, isn't it? He goes, most of the time scholarships or anything like that are named after dead people.
In memory of.
They're in memory of. He goes, so here I am walking around having dinner with these, these kids that we're putting through college, and I'm still alive. He's like, it's kind of weird. And I'm like, you got a point. Like, you don't get anything named after you, and you don't get anything in your memoriam until you're dead. So you don't even get to enjoy it. So I'm like, hey, you got one up on all those other dead people as you're still alive. And he laughed.
I know, I got it.
Yeah.
We jump out to get away from the Air Force.
It's just, but that triggered that thought, or that memory was, all these things are all after.
Yeah. So on the next one, we got Fort Lee, Virginia, of course, named after General Lee. In fact, the Lee Mansion, I don't know if they changed the name on the Lee Mansion at Arlington, because they built the cemetery around General Lee's. Actually, I think it was his wife's house, but they call it the Lee Mansion. So I don't know if they changed the name of that or whatever, but that's over on Arlington. But Fort Lee, Virginia, is now called Fort Gregg Adams after Lieutenant General Arthur Gregg and Lieutenant Colonel Charity Adams. Gregg was a key figure in the integration of black soldiers into the Army. Adams was one of the highest ranking female soldiers during World War II. And so they chose, I guess they combined both of them, and now it's called Greg Adams. So, and anyway, so that's Greg Adams. I got a friend that works on Greg Adams. He does what I do, and he's up there at Greg Adams. And if I'm guessing, I don't know either one of those people, Adams or the Greg. So they come up with that for those reasons. So
right. So yeah, that's the next one. Fort Pickett, Virginia. Now it is called Fort Barfoot. I almost said barefoot, but there's no E. So Barfoot. After Army Tech Sergeant Van T. Barfoot, who received the Medal of Honor for his actions with the 45th Infantry Division during World War II in Italy in 1944.
Yeah. Now, Fort Pickett is a huge reserve base, basically. I mean, that's basically what it is. It's for the reserve forces and stuff like that. Way back in the day, it was a regular active duty Army base, but now it's strictly over there's Federal Reserve soldiers and stuff like that serve in the reserves. So, at first I thought it was barefoot, and then I had to reread it, and it's called Barfoot.
Yeah, Barfoot. There's no E.
Now, and see, this is one person that served as enlisted military that they've named a base after. So I guess they had to give an enlisted guy a base because, I mean, there was, when they gave out the Medal of Honor in the Civil War, they gave out more Medals of Honor than we've ever given out since then. I mean, it was like, you know, I guess getting a Bronze Star back then, but the Medal of Honor was just handed out to a lot. If you do your research, it got handed out a lot. And then they tightened up. Hey, you should actually earn this thing. You got a Medal of Honor for surviving a battle, you know?
Yeah.
So,
well, and there was a lot, like we had talked about it, you know, when I was in, and you see it more and more is, you know, typically they'll give a higher prestige award to the officers that were in charge.
yeah.
Yet they really weren't the ones, you know, and yeah, I'm a little salty because, you know, being an enlisted guy, you know, we're the ones doing all the work and we're doing everything, but then you're going to give that shiny collared fella.
Well, yeah, because and then you look at all the movies and you see the generals are back there watching the battle.
Yeah.
You know, saying, okay, now send such and such down there. I'm sorry, sir. He lost a leg last time you set him down there. Oh, yeah. Get that other guy. What's his name? Wiley.
And they're always the ones, they show up, they're always clean, they're showered, they're well fed, or, you know, like it makes for good movies, but there's a lot of reality that, you know, we're out there, the ground pounders, we're the ones getting dirty doing the work.
Yeah.
But because, oh, well, he was in charge, he told you what to do. How did he tell me what to do? He can't even tie his own boots. Yeah. He's got an aide to do that for him. Like, what do you mean? You know, he did all this stuff. Well, his strategy and, oh, you know, he can read a book and take a test. Good job.
Yeah. The next one is a base where I was stationed twice, and I hated it both times. Is Fort Polk, Louisiana. Okay. Fort Polk, Louisiana was changed to Fort Johnson after Army Sergeant William Henry Johnson, who received the Medal of Honor posthumously. Yeah, for actions in the Argonne Forest of France during World War One. Okay,
I dug back in the books on that one.
Again, they honored a sergeant, an enlisted man, who received the Medal of Honor. And if you know anything, if you've read anything about World War One and the Argonne Forest, dude, those guys fought and froze to death in the Argonne Forest. So yeah, and Argonne Forest is, I mean, it ain't that far from Belgium, you know, from the Battle of the Bulge and stuff like that. The Argonne Forest isn't, and it's just as bad. And one of my favorite movies is Band of Brothers, that show them fighting in Argonne Forest and in Belgium also at the Battle of the Bulge. So yeah. All right. So this is number 9, and it's on you, brother.
Fort Rucker, Alabama. So now it is this is why he gave it to me, y'all. Novosel. After Army Chief Warrant Officer 4, Michael J. Novosel, an aviator who received the Medal of Honor for a medevac mission under fire in Vietnam, where he saved 29 soldiers.
Yes. Dude, if you read his story, the heroics, I said it, the heroism that this guy showed, soldiers hanging on to anything they could as he was taking off, the number of bullets in that helicopter shouldn't have been flying, but he pulled it out and saved those guys while under extreme fire and stuff like that. So I read his story, and dude, this guy has got steel clackety clacks. You know what I mean?
Well, and I honestly, I don't know that I don't remember his specific story, but I have read and seen a lot of stories, especially because that was typical. The pilots were chief warrant officers.
Yes.
And so most of them, though, that flew, especially in Vietnam, every single one of them had cojones of, and to be able to pull in and land and then take off, and like you said, it's, with him where it was like, I'll make this work. If you can hold on, I'm getting you out of here, and let's go.
Well, you remember the helicopters that they used back in Vietnam. I mean, they did have first generation Cobras and stuff like that, but not what we got or the Marine Corps has and stuff like that. But the Huey helicopter, I mean, that thing was a tugboat. And I mean, when I was reading it, that soldiers they held on as they were taking off, and they jumped up and grabbed a skid, then wrapped their legs around it, and they didn't even know they were down there, and they took off. And before they landed, the guy just dropped off and hit the ground. That 29 people, if you can imagine 29 people inside and on a Huey helicopter, that's insane for something that's built for like 13.
Yeah, I was going to say their payload is, I was thinking maybe 10, but it probably is more than that, I think the normal payload, for people was the half, if not more than half of what was.
Because like when I was a black hat at the Air Assault School, when we did a Huey rappels, we only had 3 people on each door to rappel out of when they came to school and stuff like that. And you could hear the Huey struggling. And then I think it was like a year later or whatever, then the Blackhawks came out, and they were just like workhorses. Nothing like the Huey and stuff like that. And if you ever been in a Blackhawk and they pull some G's, I was in Iraq at it was after the Desert Storm and everything was over, and they left us behind over there to not guard oil well fires and shit. The one of the artillery units came into base after being out at one of the outposts, because we had outposts along the border of Iraq from Kuwait. They came back in, and when you come in, you wash down your vehicles and all that stuff on the wash rack. Then you park them inside the compound and stuff like that. And they were doing that, and some of these things were pretty rugged. And one of the ammo haulers for howitzer, they had an electrical fire on it. Now remember, that hauler carries 96 howitzer rounds. Okay, besides what the howitzer has loaded down on it already. So, and they follow and they back up door to door to feed ammo in there once they use their basic load and stuff. Plus, inside there's all the powder charges for all that stuff. Well, it caught on fire and it started rocking the place. And it was, I mean, it was right. Well, it's right across the street from where all our helicopters were. And all of a sudden it started going off and I just hit the floor. And all of a sudden I got on the radio and called back to where they were bunking. And it was actually a field phone. I said, hey, we got an artillery piece over here and the hauler is just blowing crap up. And I said, I don't know what's going on. And next thing I know, these Humvees started coming around the corner racing, and it was full of pilots. And I said, man, they go, okay. And they said, you got to stay on the ground. I said, I ain't staying nowhere. If you're leaving, I'm going with y'all because I ain't going to stick around. And so when that dude, I mean, normally they do a pre-check. Well, under fire, they do a thing called turn that pig on, get them blades running, and they pull up. And I mean, when they pulled up, I was like flattened to the floor of the Black Hawk. And I'm looking out there and I see the blades. They're like touching the freaking ground. And it was like you went up like a slingshot. And they got them birds out of there. And we only had shrapnel pieces in a couple of birds and stuff like that. But dude, and then the scariest part was right down from there was the combat engineers. And they had all their MICLICs loaded up on their 60 tanks and stuff. And then their APCs and stuff like that. And a MICLIC is, what is it? 1,300 pounds of C4 on a cable that they shoot out over a defilade. If they're going to take out barbed wire or a defensive position, and it lands and it blows up and it just makes a perfect highway that you can.
It's right at, it's like 250 feet.
Yeah.
Of 5-pound blocks of C4 on a piece of rope that has a rocket on the end of it, and it shoots out. My last active duty, we were on it was a new concept vehicle, it was an ABV. Yeah. They took those, they modified a tank turret, they took the tank turret off, put a different turret on so that it could manage 2 of those MICLIC charges.
Yeah.
And you could launch them. And yeah, you want to see awesomeness in one little launch. You watch the rocket, and I mean, the rocket going is cool. And then all of a sudden it lays on the ground, and then they hit and then just, oh yeah. I was never mad at the time that they're like, let's go, shoot MICLICs, and because I had never heard of them until I got there to the combat engineers, and was working on that vehicle, and to see, and then to have 2 of them, to know the amount of, but in that crate, they're in that thing's what, 8 or 10 foot long,
Yeah.
about I'd say 4 foot wide.
Yeah. It hangs
And
over
all of-
both sides of an APC.
yeah, they're coiled up in there so that but it's just all C4. And
Yeah.
you can't think about the amount of boom that would make if something hit it. You just keep moving. But
Yeah.
yeah, the hole in the ground, if one of those would have went off, like in its container,
Yeah.
that concentrated, we'd have another Grand Canyon.
Yeah. So we talked about Army bases, and those were the 9 Army bases that they changed. But there is a change, but it happened many years ago in the Marine Corps, and I guess it's connected to Camp Lejeune.
It is.
Okay.
So the one and only change the Marine Corps had made was, and I'll read to give the brief history here. President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed an executive order where African Americans were, for the first time, permitted to join the Marine Corps. Between 1942 and 1949, the camp at Montford Point, North Carolina, was a recruit depot for Black recruits, training 20,000 African Americans during that period. One of the first African Americans to enlist in the Marine Corps was Gilbert Hashmark Johnson, who became a drill instructor. Johnson served during World War II and the Korean War, ultimately receiving the rank of Sergeant Major. In 1948, President Harry S. Truman ordered the military to integrate. In 1974, Montford Point was renamed Camp Gilbert H. Johnson. Camp Johnson became the home of the Marine Corps Combat Service Support Schools. In 2007, a documentary entitled The Montford Point Marine Project was released, honoring the African American Marines who trained at Montford Point.
There you go. And you've been there. You've been there.
And I've been there. So when we were reading this, to realize this was the only Marine Corps, which kind of shocked me, that was changed, because I spent 12 and a half years at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, which shares the same property as this Camp Johnson. I think they do, as far as I know, it like Camp Johnson is kind of just, there's not a lot going on there. There's some admin schools. They started sending some of the additional military training courses. The leadership courses were going out there to keep using it. But yeah, the Camp Lejeune area and where Camp Johnson is, there's what I count out like 4 different military installations in the same town of Jacksonville, North Carolina. Because you have Camp Lejeune, which is the Marine Corps base. You have Camp Johnson, which is a like administrative training base and advanced leadership courses. Camp Geiger, which is, if you remember back in some of our early videos, we talked about MCT, Marine Combat Training. Camp Geiger is the MCT for the East Coast Marines that go to Parris Island. When they come back to do MCT, they do it at Camp Geiger. And then New River Air Station, which is a Marine Corps air installation. That's the air wing base. So there's 4 major, which they don't seem real significant. Camp Lejeune and New River are the biggest. Camp Geiger and Camp Johnson are kind of small, but they're all in the same town, Jacksonville, North Carolina. Like, it's only on the map because those 4 installations.
Yeah.
But the coolest part about like this coming up, and when I read that this was the installation, was they still do an annual Montford Point Marines ceremony. And it's a big deal. It really is, because, obviously with the integration of allowing, Blacks to be in the military, and that was their boot camp. Because segregation was such a thing, they still had to find a way, like, where were they going to train them at? And there was there was a lot. Obviously, they named it after, um, with Sergeant Major Johnson by the time he got out. But the amount of history that's involved there is you live somewhere and you take advantage or take for granted that it's there. But then when you go to one of these ceremonies and you see the impact that it's created, because the legacies that it's created,
Right.
it's touching. Like you can't not. And as soon as I was, reading that, when we were looking this stuff up, I knew exactly. I've been part of these ceremonies and I've witnessed them, and it's amazing. And and that wasn't and I guess all of these other base name changes have happened in the last 5 years,
Yeah.
except for
the last 3 years.
3, yeah. And so this one was a change back in 1974. So it's I only ever knew it as Camp Johnson, but super cool. And anybody, any Marines or even Navy personnel that support the Marine Corps on the what they call the green side, they've been by Camp Johnson.
Yeah. Now, I will tell you that in the military, there's 744 U.S. military bases around the world. Army having the most of them, of course, and then 1.3 million people in uniform is what the U.S. has. Breaking that aside, because we talked all night about the Army and a little bit about the Marine Corps there. Currently, there are 20 U.S. Marine installations stateside. There are 11 satellite and aviation bases for the Marine Corps. There are 20 USMC detachments stateside. There are 3 Marine Reserve Commands, and there are 19 Marine installation bases or camps overseas. Everybody hears about Lejeune and Pendleton and so on and so forth in the stateside part of it. But man, there are Marines on Okinawa. Like, you can't throw a rock without hitting a Marine on Okinawa. Okay. Camp Mujuk in Korea. I mean, when I was worked for the government in Korea, I had to support Muju because they had nothing. Okay. They had nothing there, and we had to provide all that stuff. I took entertainment down there, did all that kind of stuff from them, gave them gym equipment. I'm going, how do you guys not have gym equipment? And they said, we're beggars.
The Marine Corps is definitely, and I learned it more and more as I went through. Yeah,
you guys are the welfare children, but you look good marching.
We are the welfare kids. We'll take anything. I mean, that was always the joke. Obviously, being in tanks was when the Army said, "Hey, this is out of date. It's not used anymore. We can't use it. We've got better stuff." The Marine Corps took it, slapped a new coat of paint on it, and said, "Here, Marines, you got brand new stuff."
Yeah.
And then we get it, and it's worse.
Yeah.
We're like, "This is crap." No, but I think I know, at least while I was in, and I imagine the numbers kind of reflect, the Marine Corps is also the smallest branch.
Yeah.
Besides
the Coast Guard.
And yeah, I would imagine that the Coast Guard
and Space Command, because we don't have no rockets to take them up there.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you a little history that the Army at one time had more aircraft than the Air Force did, because the Air Force only came into existence like 1945 or somewhere in there. I'm not really sure, and I'm talking about fixed wing. The Army Air Corps was bigger than the Air Force
Mhm.
back in the day. And we also started the thing called the Women's Auxiliary Corps, where women belong to that, and they got PCS orders, which are transfer orders. Everything came through the Women's Auxiliary Corps back in the days, and stuff like that. Before they passed a law to allow women into combat arms roles, they were always combat service support roles
Mhm.
and stuff like that. And there's combat service support, and combat MOSs in the Army. So now, if you can cut the mustard, you can choose whatever job you want. And we had a big growing experience in the Army. I know that. And a lot of dunderheads that didn't want to comply. There was a lot of sergeant majors that didn't want to comply, and officers, and they got rid of them. And that's what the military does. If you don't rock with what they want you to do, they don't need you. They'll promote some other schmuck that thinks the way they do. So, and that's the honest truth. Now, back, I want to get to Tish's post here, and I will tell you, Tish, that, and I said this on one of our other videos. When you say mental illness, that is such a broad brush to say. I say that the day you join the military, because the recruiters are just nice to you because they want to get you in. But the day you stepped off that bus, your life was never normal again. Okay, and that's where the mind game starts. And I will tell you that you live with that because we don't think like civilians. Now, when you come back from combat and stuff like that, and I always say, the PTSD in everybody's brain perceives things or accept things differently.
Mhm.
Where I could be right beside some Jason and we seen the exact same thing happen, and Jason becomes this mental case over that incident, and I just go, hey, it's just another day in country.
Yeah.
And you just move on. Now, is that still building on a mental illness because the shit didn't phase you? Okay, I don't know. Is Jason flip out and he needs medical care and he's got to go to the rear with the gear because he can't handle that stuff, or he gets, I've heard of things like mental or combat blindness, where you just shut everything off to the point where you can't see nothing, or it's so blurry because your brain is just firing rockets inside your head. I don't know. I've never been diagnosed with PTSD myself. I do. I don't have dreams of everything that I saw. I have caught myself in situations where it made me daydream about something or something that's happened and stuff like that. So it's just, I don't know, because like I say, people perceive things and process things different. Can you have PTSD from a fender bender? Yes, you can have that. From a fall off a ladder or whatever. Yeah, sure, you can have it because it's how your brain perceives stuff and what is traumatic to it. I do believe you have it when, you took shrapnel to the brain or what. I mean, that's something that you can't help and stuff like that. So I guess when I was in, you didn't admit nothing. You didn't admit nothing. and now they got full medical teams, and you have to go through sit down sessions, and they evaluate you, and they're trained to know, hey, this guy's trying to pull the wool over our eyes, and so you get extra extended care because they're
Well,
going
and
to
that,
you.
yeah, that's, and obviously with me being, my career being, later than yours that was something that I did experience was they made us do testing before we deployed. And then when you came back as part of the post-deployment process of reintegrating back into, everything, you did testing again. And
Yeah.
they would look at the two, and I agree with you 100% on it's based off that individual and how their specific brain fires and goes because you've seen it, I've seen it, anybody that served has seen it. There's two guys standing there watching the same exact thing, and one guy has a reaction afterwards and the other doesn't.
Yeah.
And why that happens, none of us know. And I don't want to say blessed, I guess, but I'm also like I don't have a PTSD diagnosis. Out of all the things that you do get a diagnosis for when you retire from the VA, the PTSD is typically one of the most common. I don't really want to say easiest because it's not easy, but it's the most common, initial assessment for anybody that served, especially if you did a combat tour, was, well, you have PTSD, you have this, and it's. But I think people's reactions are slightly different. Do I have some instances and situations that could be labeled as a PTSD situation? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But most of my memories, like Tara and I sit down and we'll talk, and I try to, give her as much information, or, we'll talk about a story. But honestly, most of the stuff doesn't trigger until I'm sitting here, like in this platform with all the veterans, or especially when I'm face to face with another veteran, is things will trigger to where I'll remember that. But if I'm outside of that conversation, I can't remember it as much as I want to.
Right.
And so, but I think that there's a level of mental health, which kind of what you started to allude with earlier was when you join and you serve, whether it's 4 years or 40, you are mentally different than everybody else that's in the civilian population that didn't.
Yeah.
And I think that that's where the difference is, and I don't take away from anybody that is in any kind of a mental therapist or clinical situation. But if they didn't serve and they're trying to, rehabilitate or trying to do therapy to a veteran, it's a very difficult job because veterans have a wall. Like, we put this up, whether we want to or not, that we're only allowed to release so much information to you, because if you didn't serve or you weren't in that position, you're not going to totally understand what I'm telling you, and you're going to get what I've found. And I know that, it's going to be one of our coming up lives about like our post transition, what our personal things was. I think that's been the hardest part, was you have to temper what you say around certain people in crowds because they don't understand it. And they look at you and you're not normal. Actually, I am. I've got, 150,000 other Marine, brothers and sisters that they'll think the same way. And I've got, umpteen 100,000, soldiers that, anybody that served are all going to have that same thought process. And they're like, but that's not normal. Well, it's not normal for you because you didn't serve. But if you served, especially in a combat deployment, or, or any kind of conflict, it doesn't even really have to be, like, you're going to get it. You're going to understand. And, but I do think from someone on the outside that didn't, wasn't there or wasn't doing it, we are always labeled as mental health issues. And
I think I really truly, you see a lot of soldiers and stuff like that. They come in basic training. They're taught to kill, shoot, move, and communicate. Okay, and you're taught that stuff. Okay, weapons training, hand-to-hand combat, on and on and on and on and on. You're building a fighting machine. Okay, and then you go to war, you deploy into war, and I tell people this all the time, that you can train and train and train and do as realistic training as humanly possible, knowing that no one's going to shoot you. And then you get into combat where a likelihood of somebody shooting you is real, and you really don't know how you're going to react. Because I had some stud guys and when they got into combat, they were just, every time I turned around, they were hiding for cover. And you don't know what you're going to do until you're put into that situation. You could be a great leader, and you're like that lieutenant in Battle of the Bulge on Band of Brothers, that he found every way not to be on the front lines. There was always an excuse and stuff like that. But then you go through all this stuff, and you go through battle, and you do all this stuff. And then when you come back and you try to integrate back into society with mental illness, PTSD, they want you to act normal again. Soldiers, Marines, Air Force, Navy, when they come back and they get in trouble and stuff like that, it is, I'm not saying it's a defense, but how are you supposed to act normal again? You know what I mean? When you've got illness,
and I think
PTSD,
the hard part is the fact that once somebody's gone through those experiences, there's a new normal. In our eyes, what you and I as brothers, and battle buddies is normal. Somebody who didn't experience those, they're like, well, that's not normal. Well, yeah, it is. For us, like, there's a new reality that gets instilled in you, and it does make it hard to integrate with normal people. And I still, to this day, people kind of like, I'll make a comment about something and they're looking at me like, whoa, hold on, and I'm like, what? How was that offend? Not that they're offended, but how did they get kind of like, maybe we shouldn't? And I'm like, this is normal conversation. What, like, and it's a new normal. It's no different than, I guess a really good example is when I retired and I went back to my hometown that I graduated high school with for a few years, and I was back there and I ran into people. Well, they thought that I was the same 17-year-old kid that partying and doing all these things at 17, but now I'm back home at 35, and I've done an entire Marine Corps career, and now they're like, well, you didn't do that before, well, what happened to when you? And I'm like, okay, one, I've matured, right? But two, I've went through so many life, like, I appreciate that you remember that 17-year-old kid that left home, but now I'm a 34-year-old veteran that is retired from a totally different life than what you would understand.
Sure.
Sure. And I think that's I'm kind of glad. I know this is off subject of our typical, we've talked about the base realignment stuff.
When do we not go off topic?
Never. But this is something that is very, and I know, as important to you as it is to me, is that label, where when you mentioned it earlier, while you're active duty, you have no ailments. Nothing hurts, nothing aches until that last 6 months. And then all of a sudden you can be sick. You can have aches, you can have pains.
Sure.
You can have but they don't, because you joined to serve, whether it was to go to combat, whether it was just to serve your country or whatever, but you served and you got trained for a purpose.
Right.
And once you did that purpose and then you come back and you don't have that, or if while you're in, they tell you, hey, guess what? We'll let you stay in, but now you can't deploy. Like,
Yeah.
you're cutting them right at the knees.
Right.
And it's so hard. And I guess I just want to put the warning and caution out there to, anybody that has family members struggling, or, when they're dealing with other veterans, just realize you're normal. And I'm not taking away from anybody that isn't a veteran, but your normal as a non-veteran is not the same normal as a veteran in
Yeah.
no way, shape, or form. And I think that that's where, as a whole, kind of, especially in the mental health community, and I appreciate their efforts. And I've seen several wizards in my time,
Right.
is if you haven't been there, you don't understand it. And it just reiterates even more. I know last week, Reverend Dream came up and gave his testimony,
Yeah.
reiterated why we're doing this channel and
Yeah.
why we're serving the purpose of getting on here with other veterans, even if it's just you guys typing it out. But normal is only normal in your relative spectrum of what you see.
Exactly.
So don't be quick to judge somebody that, well, I seen the same thing. Why are you having nightmares? I'm not. We were at the same place. And it's just not, that's not our job to judge
So
that.
maybe that's something that we need to talk about next week and spend a whole hour on that, because there's a lot of good questions in the chat and stuff like that. But I think that you can't talk about it enough. When you don't talk about it, people tend not to come out and say, hey, I want to tell people it's okay to talk about it. Okay. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this channel, is I want people to talk about it. I want to hear them. And so when we do open mics, don't be, there's nothing to be ashamed about, nothing to hide. To me, I feel like you're amongst friends no matter what. And also, do parents and do spouses have PTSD on what they got back from combat? So those are things I'd like to talk about next Tuesday for this channel. And I hope you guys join us on that. This weekend, we're leaving out on Thursday to go to 10 Killer, to the meetup up there at 10 Killer meetup. So we'll be there Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, come back on Monday. And then we'll have a live on Tuesday, or we may leave Sunday. I don't know what we're going to do. I got to check with my boss. And so, but next Tuesday, we're gonna extend this mental stress, mental illness, and PTSD, not only for the military veterans, but also to their families, and talk to you. And I will give you personal experiences that my children went through, and why none of them was going to join the military after what they saw. Okay. Right. So that's what we're going to do next Tuesday. Hey, look for us on a live together at Lake 10 Killer. We'll probably pull out the old cell phones and go live and walk around, introduce you to all the channels and stuff like that. Something different than what we normally do. But hey, I'm one of those people, I like to get other channels and shout them out and let them introduce themselves and stuff like that. And hopefully we'll be on other people's channels. So look for us there. Brother, I'm glad you're home. You're home safe, you and your bride. And didn't you bring some baggage home with you?
Man, you're driving down the road, and then all of a sudden people are like, hey, I'm right here. And they show up.
Yeah. So yeah, he's got a guest that just, drove for like 2 days.
Yeah. He's like, man, how do I break up?
Jerry said you got a freeloader.
They said, hey, if you build it, they'll come, and all of a sudden they're coming in. I'm getting it. I'm like, okay, how can I set you up? He's like, no, I'm good. Just give me a place to crash and some fellowship. And we're super excited about having a guest. And, you know, as busy it is, we always have time for everybody else. And definitely just reiterating what Mike said was ready for 10 killer, ready to see everybody, shake hands, hugs, all those things. And yes, Reverend Dream. And honestly, I'm going to tell you, brother, like after seeing you last week, I was in Walmart today and I'm looking and I'm like, you have a doppelganger out there. I'm just telling you, because I had to like triple take because I'm like, no, if it was him, he would have said something to me and just kept going by. So hit me up. We're definitely close. But
Yeah.
next week for sure, guys, come in. You know, I don't know if we're necessarily going to pull anybody up. I guess the situation will you know, kind of dictate what the conversation is.
We'll scan the battlefield.
And right, we want to show everybody. That's why we're doing it, guys. This is just as much therapy for Mike and I as it is for anybody else out there. Like just being able to talk it and say it.
Yeah.
And there's so many you know, other veterans out there that we know we're not reaching yet. And that's where we need y'all's help is, you know, every one of you have some sort of a veteran connection. Reach out even further. Get some people in there. Let's get some more comments and that interaction, because there's more stories that we want to hear, that we know need to be told.
Yep.
And this is where we want to do it. So
and please share out our videos on your community page if you got one, and hopefully we'll reach somebody that might find it interesting and that we can learn off of too. So, hey guys, thanks for coming in. Again, we had to do another hour and 41-minute show, but that's what we said at the beginning. We ain't promising you an hour. Okay.
We warned you all. And if you're still here, then you accepted that warning and said,
exactly,
these guys are going to chat, because it's what we know. It's our heart, our lifeblood, what we do every single day.
Sure.
You know, even on the days we don't want to, we're still doing it. And, you know, loving every minute of it. We appreciate all of you coming in, your comments, your chats, and just getting us out there. Like, it's definitely the best therapy than we could ever get.
Yeah.
You know, there's not a counselor out there that's going to be able to do what we're doing right here, at least for ourselves. And you guys are helping in that. So thank you.
And if you're looking for a Sergeant's Talk TV shirt, go to MT Homestead, go to our About page, then go to our merch store, and we got those on there, and we got coffee cups on there. Hey, they make a great Christmas gift.
And they look good.
And like I said at the beginning, I got a gift. I got a couple of gifts from my battle buddy that will help him look a lot better, if you will. No, hey, I'm glad you guys are home safe, brother. And I will see you at 10 Killer. I hope I see you guys at 10 Killer. If not, look for some videos, and we'll try to jump in on everybody's live that's going on over there. So, guys, we love you. God bless you, and we'll see you on the next one.
Always think of that.
That's right. All right, guys.
Bye now.
I'm trying to turn this off, and I got the wrong mouse. I'm going, man, where did it go?
Don't mind us. We're new here. It's our first day.
Yeah. All right, guys.
See if you don't know.